familiar to this place, is where it's the only place in the world where we five Nordics are together, all five of us. It was a decision back in 1993 to make a common joint Nordic embassy, and we are situated here, all five, and this house, which we called Felleshuset, the common house, gemeinsam house, is used by all of us. And the event we've had today, we've had a Nordic-German talk on climate. We Nordics, we are similar in many ways. We share many of the, or I would say almost all the same values in terms of multilateralism. Climate is top of the agenda, as it is here in Germany. And interesting to have this Nordic-German climate talk today, following also a Nordic-German talk in Oslo between the German Chancellor and the five Nordic Prime Ministers in August, where security, energy and climate was on the agenda. And the timing of this event is, I think, perfect, just moving out of COP27. And we have our distinguished ambassadors, envoys with us, the Nordics and the German, to share impressions. I think I'm gonna leave it there and jump directly into what we're gonna be part of, and handing the word over to you, Sven Egenter, who is the editor-in-chief of Clean Energy Wire, which brings good quality journalism, which I appreciate as a former journalist myself. And you head the team behind award-winning Klimafakten here in Germany. You have several decades of journalistic experience behind you, and you're a good expert in climate science communication, exactly what we need today. So I leave the word to you, and you will take this event on from there on. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador, for the introduction and your welcoming words. Welcome, good afternoon to all of you. Yes, it is indeed a perfect moment to have this distinguished panel here in the Nordic embassies in Germany, right on the heels of the Sharm el-Sheikh COP27, which has left observers across the world with very mixed feelings, and maybe we can help sort those a little bit out today. A small step towards climate justice is what Ursula von der Leyen has, put as a line out right after that. But beyond that, there was a lot of disappointment in the activist environment, in NGOs, and also within the European Union and European countries. I'm just quoting here Sir David King, the former UK chief scientific advisor, who said, "The world remains on track for 2.7 degrees Celsius rise in temperatures, which is, to anyone who knows about climate science, well beyond the comfort zone that we've come to be used to as human beings, actually." And he said, by any measure, that represents a bleak future for humanity. Now, I would hope that the climate diplomats who gather here, the climate ambassadors and the envoys of the 5-6 leading countries when it comes to climate action and plans and goals, will take a little bit of more nuanced view on that. To start with, I have the pleasure to give the floor to someone who's seen it all and knows it all on climate negotiation. The keynote speech will be held by Norbert Gorrissen, who is the Director for Climate and International Energy Politics in the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, and he's also the Deputy to the Special Envoy for International Climate Action. He's worked for many decades in this area in the Environment Ministry before, and I think we can really look forward to his keynote speech, and then we'll follow up with a hopefully lively discussion later on involving all you present here. Norbert Gorrison, please take the lectern.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, for the invitation and the applause. I'm not sure whether I'm the only one who's capable. I'm sure my colleagues are at least as capable. I would like to structure my remarks in three areas. First, I would like to talk a little bit about the German government, how it's set up right now, then coming to COP27, and then looking forward to COP28. Firstly, German government. So international climate politics is now in the Foreign Office. It has a backing with a strong backing by strong commitment by my minister Annalena Baerbock, who several times now said that the climate crisis is the single biggest risk to foreign policy, and she means it. And she appointed Jennifer Morgan, previous CEO from Greenpeace International, to serve as a state secretary for international climate policy and a special envoy. And the big advantage is that this is her subject, and she can dedicate almost all of her time to that. And we never had it like that, and that makes a difference. At the same time, we have three other ministries in the core of international climate policies we are working with very closely. The Ministry for Economic and Climate Action, which in particular looks at domestic and EU policies, but also implementation, in particular, of international commitments. Secondly, we have the Ministry for Environment, which deals with biodiversity, very important these days, and the links between climate and biodiversity loss, I think, are very well noticed these days. And they're looking at the synergies of nature-based solutions to serve both the climate and the biodiversity agenda when it comes to peatlands, to forests, to the way how we use land, how we protect our coastal zones, and how we do adaptation. So very valuable, important contribution. And finally, we have the Ministry of Development Cooperation, which for many years has focused a lot and is focusing even more on climate action in developing countries and how we can support them in order to deliver on this challenge. COP27, I would and one more remark from international. What we are doing right now within the next weeks and months is to set up a climate foreign policy for the German government for the first time. The intention is to put that to the cabinet of ministers in spring next year, and the work has begun, and we will do that with strong participation of stakeholders of the civil society, but also the business community, and of course all ministries in the German government. And it will cover not only what we can do as Germany, but also what we can do jointly with others, in particular what we will be doing within the EU and what we do multilaterally. Second point now, COP27. I would structure the outcome in four areas. The first is really, and I think that is a success, although it was not the priority for us, is that we agreed on funding arrangements for addressing loss and damage, in particular for vulnerable countries, focused on vulnerable countries, because that is serving now really as a big offer to implement climate equity. And in the core of that is also the decision to set up a new fund. A transitional committee will look now at the details, and it would look in particular where the funding would come from. And it should not be the usual way as it was in the past, that the so-called donor countries, the developed countries, only have to contribute. Now we need to look at innovative sources, and we also need to look at additional contributors, in particular those developing countries who are not longer only developing, but also rich. The second area is mitigation. Mitigation was not really a very successful item of this COP. We were expecting actually more. We wanted to have more progress, in particular with reflecting the outcomes of the IPCC, the various reports from UNEP, from the Secretariat, which all demonstrated very, very clearly that we are not on track to 1.5. And we were under the threat that we would get towards backsliding. In particular, in the G20, the discussion had been very difficult this year, and it didn't look good. Fortunately, in the summit of the G20, which happened in parallel to the COP, the language from Glasgow was preserved, and that could also then be copied to the outcomes of COP27. And we have a few points which lead in a better direction. In particular, I would like to mention that there is energy now highlighted, in particular the role renewable energies should play in addressing the challenge of mitigation. But it was disappointing that it was not possible to get a breakthrough with regard to the global phase out or phase down of fossil fuels. Very clearly, the influence of, in particular, the Arabic countries were not helpful in that regard. Third point is finance. Finance is a lot shaped by the problem that we as donor countries were not able to deliver so far on the 100 billion commitment, and we are working on that, and we promise to do more. And I think year 2023 will be a crucial year for that. We committed to deliver on adaptation finance and double it. But I think the positive outcome of the COP was that the discussion broadened, and it broadened beyond just what is happening inside UNFCCC. It picked up, in particular, the need to look at the financial architecture, the global financial architecture at large, initiated by the Prime Minister from Barbados, Mia Mottley, and then replicated by some other leaders, in particular President Macron. It's now obvious that we need to have a discussion on how the Bretton Woods institutions could better contribute to this agenda. And my final point on COP27 is initiatives. That was a very strong point in Glasgow, and I think it's still needed to look on what happened afterwards with all those initiatives. The number of initiatives coming new initiatives in Sharm el-Sheikh were limited, but a few of them I think are very important. In particular, agreements on a collaboration of a number of countries to work towards greening the energy system in Egypt, with expanding renewable energies dramatically, and coming out with a new just energy transition partnership with Indonesia, where most of the countries here are also involved in. So that is a successful part, but I think the Secretary General really very clearly focused also on a point which needs to be addressed. It is to avoid any kind of greenwashing, and he was launching a report which presented very clearly criteria and the need to address in a very transparent way how to avoid that all these net zero commitments coming from private sector and everybody else is simply just propaganda and not being filled up. So he asked the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC Secretariat to set up a system in order to follow up of all these announcements. So that's what I would assess from COP27. Mixed results. It's not all bad, but it's also not good, and we certainly need to strengthen our efforts in the year to come. I would highlight for COP28 three areas. First of all, on the formal agenda, is the so-called global stock take, which takes stock how far have we come with the implementation of the Paris Agreement, with the NDCs on the table, and what does it mean for the future. And this global stock take seems to be a rather technical process, but we need to make it a political process which is fully understood and which covers in all areas: mitigation, adaptation, finance, loss and damage, and brings about new ambition for the period after 2030. But 2030 is still a long way to go, and in order to keep 1.5 alive, we need to fix and improve mitigation and ambition already in the years to come. So that's my second point. We need to implement the commitments from Glasgow, and in particular the so-called mitigation work program, which means all countries have to come forward with more ambition. The European Union has to deliver on its Fit for 55 package. The European Union has also to look forward what it can do afterwards. We need to work together to control that the influence, in particular of Arabic countries in Dubai, will be limited, and that we can make a push of on new ambition. And what we need actually is a coalition of progressive countries from the north and the south. And after having this agreement on loss and damage, I think it's more likely to get to create such a coalition than it was beforehand. And thirdly, underlying and really make or break again is finance. I mentioned the 100 billion. I think it is a question of equity, of solidarity, and it is a question of, are we able really to change the way how finance is delivered? Are we able to de-risk countries? Are we able to put the discussion on a higher level in order to look what the financial system can deliver on, and are we able to really look how we can also address the other issues like inequality, food security, energy security, increasing indebtedness. That is still a very challenging task, in particular in the geopolitical situation we are in, and we don't know how the year 2023 will evolve, but certainly it won't be easy from the very beginning. To conclude, a week ago, the OECD released a report on tipping points, and they made clear that some of the so-called tipping points may be already hit. In particular, the tipping point of the melting of the Greenland and Western Arctic ice shield, and also the tipping point on the permafrost in the tundra region in the northern hemisphere, and that could have dramatic effects on life on Earth. But what the OECD also was looking at, and I think that's my positive note at the end, is couldn't there be also positive tipping points? Things like strengthening itself to more ambition. One of the points which you could look at is in particular how prices and costs for renewable energies have decreased. In more of that, more ambition, also by civil engagement, by civil society, the general public, and all parties, all countries would certainly help. So a positive tipping point could perhaps address the negative tipping points. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Norbert Gorison, for this introduction. And, again, he made the point of glass half full, glass half empty on very dramatic elements like the tipping points. I'm now very happy to bring in our panel to discuss just that and to see how their view on this is. And I would like to invite to the stage Hans Olaf Iverek from the Norwegian Special Envoy in Climate and Security in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would also like to invite Matthias Frumery from the Swedish Ministry of Environment and who leads the Swedish climate efforts. I would like to invite Kerstin Stendahl, the Special Envoy for Climate Change of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Finland. And then I would like to invite Thomas Anker Christensen, Denmark's Climate Ambassador. And last, but certainly not least, Benedikt Höskuldsson, who is Iceland's Special Envoy on climate Please take a seat. Yes, I would really like, after Norbert has mentioned, the positive and the negative, the critical elements of the COP27, would like to get your quick take, if you want, looking back at these 2 intense weeks and all the diplomacy in the run-up and afterwards. Has this event left you a little bit more optimistic or a little bit more pessimistic that we can speed up climate action? And actually, why is that the positive or the more skeptical take? And I would really like to start with you, Benedict, going a quick round through to give a quick introduction to that COP reading from your end.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it was a mixed bag, for sure. And as has been said, one of the upside is, of course, the loss and damage. I mean, that's an issue that had to be addressed, and the decision was made to, create the facility. It remains to be seen how that will work out. But that was when you are a part of the conversations that took place, you knew that would have to be resolved, and so that's a success. Okay. But I do think that when it comes to raising ambitions, we did not get anywhere. Like we said, we're on a path to 2.78. That's a disaster. So we really need to put much more ambition into the play, and so that needs to be addressed specifically. I think what was maybe another positive, which was the adaptation. There is a momentum now for sort of bringing more resources to adaptation. Iceland has actually undertaken and done that. We have increased our share towards adaptation this year already, and we intend to do that continuously. We joined the Adaptation Fund, for example, which is for us then an important sort of policy statement. And there is this group out there, champion group for adaptation finance, which we joined with the aim of doubling resources towards adaptation. So it was a mixed bag. There's no question about it. But one has to also not forget that, the conference, it is a process. So it's a process with where every country has a say, and we need to just go through that process. We need to go faster, but it is a process, and we can never actually forget that.
If I just pass that question, thank you very much. I mean, directly onto this process, are you now going with a little bit more optimism into this process after the COP27, or has it left you largely frustrated over the things that have been mentioned as stumbling blocks?
I think for us, in a certain way, COP27 was a wake-up call. And I think, if anything, we go to the negotiations, the global process, with even more realism. I think we, as Europe, had underestimated the geopolitics, the global geopolitics, and how they play into the negotiations. We had, and that's the risk of all of us being in our own little bubble, where we reinforce our own analysis and don't listen to other parts of the world. So I think we had underestimated the impact of the COVID divide between those who have vaccines and those who don't. We had also underestimated the global impact of the war in Ukraine, in the sense that the war is causing not only an energy crisis in Europe, but actually Can you hear me? Yes. So the energy crisis we feel in Europe is only a small part of what many countries in the developing world feel in terms of energy, both shortage and very high energy prices that is driving their debt to the highest levels in 30 years, and is really driving a global debt crisis. And on top of that, food shortages and shortages of fertilizer and so on. And we had somehow assumed that by coming to the conference and asking critical questions of the need for a loss and damage fund and facility, we would rationally be making the correct argument and would, in a way, convince all those countries who feel a burning need for taking care of their fragility and the loss and damage that they experience every day now because of climate change, that somehow we would rationally win them over to our side, given that we thought we had the right arguments. But it took us a long time to realize that we didn't have the trust or the support from all those countries that we need to build the coalition with to put the pressure on mitigation, and that in fact all the way to the last minute of the conference, the most vulnerable and the most fragile chose to side up with the largest emitters in the global south in order to, in the negotiations, put the pressure on our side of the negotiations. And what surprised us was the fact that this then became a zero-sum game, that many countries were willing to risk their long-term interests in terms of bringing down emissions for the, in our eyes, short-term gain of getting the promise of the setting up of a new fund that we don't know how will work and how much money will be in it. But we had underestimated the psychological importance of having that win. And hence I think that's my point about the realism. I think going forward we will have to be better at our strategy in understanding the global south and the vulnerabilities and how also Europe geopolitically plays into that. And we simply have to be more careful, more precise, and more deep in our analysis of understanding.
Yeah, thank you. That is a very interesting point. And Kerstin, I mean, to you now, the question, the good analysis, is always the key, and learnings, obviously, also to go forward. So, would you take this as one of the sort of positives forward, that with a bit more realism, we know now what to do next, or what is your take on the COP as a whole, but also with this regard to this very specific question of building trust and creating a sort of drive forward?
Thank you very much. Is it on? Can you hear me? Very good. I think there were many lessons learned here, and I think, as it is with our big international conferences nowadays, there are two worlds. There is the negotiating world, and then there's the massive tents and lots of side events going on. And there I can see, and I think we all felt it, that there is a lot of energy in that other side as we do know what it takes now, what we need to do. And I think a lot of, NGOs, private sector, municipalities are aware of this and are moving forward, despite what we might think is, slowness of negotiations. I think we also know that multilateral negotiations always are slow, and the fact that we came together and the fact that we did, despite going over time, we did come to a conclusion in a geopolitical situation which is not easy at the moment. The fact that we keep on arguing with each other means that we also talk to each other still, and I think that's a very, very good sign. It is clear that we need to step up now on mitigation. We are very, very far from where we need to be, and that's where pressure needs to be on. When it comes to loss and damage, it was in the end also a show of solidarity to those of us who are at most risk when it comes to climate change, and this was acknowledged by both negotiators in the room, but I also think at the world at large. So a mixed bag, but still, we are moving forward with combating climate change, and we will do better in Dubai. Thank you.
So, Matthias, so that was clearly a positive sort of handover to you. I mean, Sweden will be in a specific and very important position next year in the EU. What is your take? Has the COP27 left us all, but also your country with the diplomatic efforts that lie ahead, in a better position to achieve what Kerstin just mentioned, that we must move ahead faster, and that there is a strong consensus on that. What is your take now?
Thanks. Well, I would agree with very much what Kerstin said, that we have these sort of two worlds at the COP. So on the one hand, sort of the negotiations, and on the other hand, sort of all the increasing number of actors. I think this COP was, if not one of the most well attended. I think there were some 48,000 accredited participants. Of course, not all of them there at the same time, but still, a lot of people. And the kind of energy that we see outside negotiations. If we, for example, had a Swedish pavilion where a number of Swedish companies were present, and the kind of enthusiasm and energy that they portray is, of course, something which we would want to see present in the negotiation rooms themselves. But I think also sort of another reflection on COP27 is also sort of when we use the term now negotiations, because we're not negotiating new targets, basically. We have the targets we need in the Paris Agreement. So what we're doing basically is very much negotiating sort of work processes in how to achieve those targets. And we have a number of those processes launched both at COP26 and now some new ones at COP27. And so what we then from a number of countries are hoping to achieve with these work programs, as we call them, or various types of workshops. And COP26 was even called the workshop COPs because there were so many workshops decided at COP26. So, it's a lot of focus on negotiating these processes. And personally, I would think that we might spend a bit too much time on that, actually. We're even discussing whether we should have a virtual or in-person workshop. And that itself takes a lot of time to discuss, and given the urgency of climate action, it doesn't seem to me, quite right that we're paying so much attention to those kind of details. But still, I think it's worth recalling that a lot of efforts in the negotiations themselves are actually spent on those kind of discussions. How do we lift ourselves up from that and again look to all the various types of actors which are engaged in climate action, and decreasing number of actors, and building on the kind of experiences I think like countries here present on the panel have in our countries with the transition already ongoing, and highlighting then the opportunities that we see in climate action, what it brings in terms of jobs and new growth. How can we sort of build that into the process more clearly and have that as sort of the common goal of the COP, and not only then in the negotiations, but sort of broadly using the COPs as a platform to highlight those kind of opportunities. I think that's something which we'll be hoping to bring forward also during the Swedish year presidency.
That is actually a very interesting take, to sort of, leave behind that notion of negotiation and trying to create a joint opportunity ultimately. I mean, that is something that would certainly need some leadership to achieve. I would just hand on to over to Hans Olaf. I mean, but he has mentioned the opportunities, and Norway has been, very strong and sort of seizing on some of the technologies and opportunities going forward in a net zero or climate neutral world. At the same time, you've also still have a legacy and a special role in bridging, if you want, the old worlds and the new worlds, and maybe even the various worlds at the COP. What is your take on the outcome, and especially in looking forward?
Thank you. Now the question is whether I should talk like a politician or a bureaucrat, or as a civil civil servant, or maybe just a citizen of Norway. But I will try to address your questions because you're bringing up a lot of issues here that I can. But let me first say something about the COP process, and I think Matthias underscored that this is a process, and in order to measure or to state whether you thought COP27 was a success or not. I think you need to relate it where we are at in terms of the process. And this was by and large a process COP. So there were no sort of big decisions that we had expected to come out of COP27 because these discussions happened at COP26 and luckily they got sort of reconfirmed at COP27, and of course that was the key issue, whether we backtracked or backslided or not. I also think that when you follow media and you've read all the reports coming out before COP27, I think of course the verdict is quite clear that we didn't really step up to the call to action, that all these reports, be it from the World Meteorological Organization, we have the various UNEP reports, all the GAP reports, the SG stepped up on the first day saying we are on a highway to hell with the foot on the accelerator, whether that was helpful or not, and what is going to say next year, that's going to be quite interesting to listen to. So from that perspective, I don't think that we really stepped up to the challenge that we are all faced with and really delivered. So then, and this has been mentioned also by my colleagues there already, I think what's encouraging to see is actually the energy outside the negotiation rooms. And you can see that business leaders are jetting in, talking about all these new solutions. The trillions are flying in terms of at least capital ready to be deployed. So we just need to unleash the innovation. We need to unleash the various technologies that we have at hand. And from our side, we are developing a few technologies that we think could be of interest. It's not necessarily that all our partners, including in this room, share the need for those technologies, but of course we are supporting carbon capture and storage. We are then focusing on reducing emissions from cement and waste in Norway and developing a whole value chain for storing carbon in the North Sea. So that is progressing quite well. We're putting quite a lot of money into it. We have also announced quite ambitious wind targets, 30 gigawatt before 2040. The question is, of course, are we early or late? Our primary focus will be on floating wind, where we actually are now just about to finalize the first offshore floating wind farm. So that's an area where we're offering leadership. And of course, when you look at also electrification of transport, EVs, I think it also jokingly say that for you in Germany can solve some of your challenges with reducing the speed at your autobahns by increasing the number of EVs, because I don't drive faster than 90 to 100 kilometers per hour in my EV because it's using too much electricity if I'm cruising in 130. So that's a way to slow down your traffic at autobahns. We also have more than 60 ferries now under construction, which will be electric. So in that sense, if you're looking for tipping points on positive tipping points, that is actually some positive tipping points that what we have achieved in electric vehicles and then offshore transport. So I think in terms of being a little bit optimistic, the IEA, who normally used to be quite downbeat on the expectations for renewable energy, when you looked at their previous analysis, they are now really upbeat about what's happening in terms of investments in renewable energy. So something is happening out there, but I don't think it's happening fast enough. So that is our common challenge. From our side, of course, just to address this issue of oil and gas, we joined the call in Sharm to phase down oil and gas, all fossil fuels. It didn't say a deadline. We, of course, intend to continue our production of oil and gas. There is a huge need for it here in Germany. I can feel that you have cut down your temperature because I'm freezing here. We have it a little bit warmer in my office than you definitely have. So it's good to see that you are also now saving energy. But as of today, we are then trying to do our best to supply as much gas as possible to Europe, and then we'll see what's going to happen in the medium to long term. Thank you.
Norbert, I want to use that straight away as a sort of playing the ball. I mean, Hans Olaf has done that in various ways towards Germany, the country you represent and where we are. Freezing not so much maybe right now. Best practice, it just came up here as, talking about electric vehicles and, the pickup and all that. But, it leaves us with the question, we were talking about, we've now seen it's a mixed bag, there needs more to be done, there are initiatives started, and there's a lack of trust. If you think about now, Europe and Germany as part of Europe, where are the elements where you see that on a diplomatic level, but also in terms of local action, Germany and Europe can really drive, these positive elements towards a really more ambitious climate policy?
Thank you. First of all, I think the perception of the German energy policies at the moment is unfortunately too much guided by our need to replace Russian gas by short-term supplies from other gas sources, LNGs, but also extending operation hours for coal-fired power plants, including also nuclear power plants, where at the same time in Germany this year, the by far biggest legislation package have put forward in order to increase the expansion of renewable energies. And in particular, looking at the obstacles, why aren't they picking up? One is, in particular, the application and regulatory environment. So that was a major effort of a big package, and the intention and the clear target to come forward with 80% renewable energies from the electricity production by 2030. Of course, you can't see the results of such a package within weeks. It has only been adopted in summer by the Parliament, but very sure that this will deliver. Secondly, I would like to mention one point which was also particular, is also a reflection from Sharm el-Sheikh. We had been in a country, in an environment which is not that open-minded when it comes to the participation of civil society and actors outside the government. And I think we from the German side in Sharm el-Sheikh tried to provide a space for activists, also human rights, but also other civil society activists, in order to demonstrate how important it is to involve civil society and the private sector. I fully agree to what colleagues have said here in the discussions, in the conversation, because in the end, as all of you have said, a COP is not just an UNFCCC or UN conference. It's also a meeting place. It's a meeting place for everybody to be there in order to make climate action happening. And their full participation and engagement of civil society and private sector is absolutely crucial. And that would help us also in order to implement also on the domestic front, also here in Germany. Without civil society, without Fridays for Future in Germany, we would not be where we are. And I think we need more of that. And that is the positive, also a positive tipping point in a way, that young people have been very engaged in pushing us. We had a groundbreaking decision of our Constitutional Court, really demonstrating that future generations' rights are as important as current generation rights, and this should guide our policies. And we will come back to that as a governor. We will be pushed back to that, I'm very sure. But I also agree to what I think Hans Olaf just has said. We are moving in the right direction, but unfortunately not quick enough.
That is a very important point to broaden the perspective beyond politics and policy making, and the fact that the citizenry and businesses are playing an increasing and important role. Yet, having 6 distinguished diplomats here on the panel, I would like to play it back into the sort of role of that diplomacy can play. And maybe Matthias, you can elaborate a little bit. As I've said, Sweden, will have an important role when it comes to diplomatic efforts of driving ambition within Europe, within the EU, but also then as a global player. What is it that, if you were to say, where are the elements where Europe as a continent, all parts of it could play a more active role? What are the elements that should, move to the fore? I mean, Norbert just mentioned one, strengthening civil society, which is actually a strong point for Europe, clearly. But, which other elements would you think, Europe can build on in order to drive ambition?
Well, thanks. First, maybe just to pick up the point that Norbert made, that civil society and youth in particular, really keep us on our toes. And I think that's the reflection we've done in the last couple of COPs, where we're seeing that the correlation between democratic space and freedom of expression and ambitious climate policy. So the extent that you have freedom of speech and so forth also puts you in a better position, I would say, in terms of delivering ambitious climate policy. So they're clearly interlinked, and something which we, both bilaterally and through the EU, will be continue to support countries in adopting those kind of policies. And looking to how we can engage, I think we'll be taking the approach very much which we have in our bilateral climate diplomacy, which basically builds on three elements, which is policy, finance, and innovative technology. And we believe both highlighting those three individually, but also maybe primarily in jointly, will support us in putting forward to our partner countries how we see that we can bring about these opportunities which I spoke about previously, and how we can each country individually can shape policy which drives ambitious climate action, how that policy can be financed. And we, of course, both bilaterally and through the EU, we stand ready to finance through our development finance, but also how we can use export credits, for example. And ultimately, the big prize here is, of course, how we can crowd in private finance, and doing that by establishing the right kind of regulatory frameworks to basically an investment climate which attracts the kind of investment necessary, both domestically and international investments. And then finally, innovative technology. What kind of solutions are there out there, in this case from Nordic and German companies who can support the transition in countries individually? And how can we support countries in adopting policies that then make best use of those kind of technologies? And I think here from the EU side, we could actually probably up our game a bit when it comes to engaging the private sector in this. We do that, I think, bilaterally, but in all honesty, when the European Commission goes and speaks to partner countries, they might not have the same kind of connection as we do with their companies, because there are no European Commission companies, basically. So I think that's something which we'll be trying to do during our presidency. How can we engage the private sector even better also in EU climate diplomacy?
Very interesting point when it comes to broadening the perspective, but I've seen a lot of nodding and a lot of note-taking. I'm starting with Kerstin. Do you think, and I think it's the same question I would want to ask to Thomas, actually, is is the trust there in the countries we're talking about when it is about driving climate ambition through innovative technologies? Is there a trust that this is the thing to seize upon, or what needs to happen to bolster that kind of mutual trust with countries that are maybe unsure about the way forward?
Thank you. And yes, I think it's, of course, I think it's also about the narrative, and I think many of us have already provided very good examples of what we are doing nationally, and for example, Finland, when its climate act and net zero goal of 2035. What are the tools that we are using to get there? Of course, it depends on who we are talking to. Is there that trust, and finance plays a big part for those countries in the global south, where of course neither the infrastructure or the resources are the same as we have. But then again, when we talk to countries who are already on that development path, who can actually already start implementing, then the more elaborate ways of putting together climate measures, climate change measures to combat climate change, then that's where we can come in and provide that story. European countries are, of course, in a very, very good position to do so. We are ambitious. We are, we have come very, very far. So that's certainly. Is there trust throughout? No, probably not. Can we work on it? Can we work on it bilaterally? But can we also work on it through financing, and be it through multilateral or bilateral settings? Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I would say that I would leave it at that, because I know Thomas will pick up on what I left out.
Yes, I'm sure too. I mean, just adding maybe a little extra to that question is like, how could European countries bolster this development in a joint effort? Is there a specific benefit and need to do so, or do the bilateral sort of networks of talks and support deals and so on and so forth do the trick ultimately?
Let me, as a good diplomat, take a small detour in order to answer your question. Fundamentally, I think that as a diplomat, you can only take to the world and project. You project a story, a narrative about your country and who you represent, but it has to be based on facts and truth. And it's easy for us as Danish diplomats to do that, because we have both a population and a business sector that are almost more ambitious than the Danish government. The Danish population wants us to go further, faster, more ambitiously than the 70% emission reduction target we have for 2030. And our investors and our business community want that too. We have a new government being formed probably this week, but the outgoing Minister for Climate and Energy was always being criticized in Denmark for not doing enough, for being too slow. And when he was telling his colleagues from Europe and other countries and the IEA that in fact he was always being criticized and coming out at the bottom of the rankings of ministers because everybody thought that he wasn't doing enough, they were all incredulous, because in the last 3 years of policy making, we've passed more than 70 different pieces of legislation and legal acts in order to go to that 70% emission reduction trajectory. And I fully sympathize with you, Norbert, in Germany, because it's a huge undertaking to shift your energy and transport and agriculture system around in order to deliver on those high ambitions. And I think it can only be done if you have your population with you, in a way, the contract with the youth, but also if your business sector and the way your capital markets work and the way your large companies and small size companies work support that. And at least in my country, all the large companies are now doing the Science-Based Targets Initiative. They are at top of the global listings on those who implement the Sustainable Development Goals. And when they go outside Denmark, outside Europe to the rest of the world, these are the targets, and not only the values, but also the investment profiles and the business case they take with them. Which brings me back to your question. That fortunately makes it very easy to be a Danish ambassador in country X or Y, because you come with both the public support, but also with the business side that is looking for the opportunities to invest in assets that actually drive the tipping points, that drives the change. So we are using our embassies not only as platforms for a whole of government approach, and we do that both with foreign affairs, development, energy, climate, environment, food, all the different parts of the Danish government that are engaged in climate action abroad, but we also do it with the business sector. And in that sense, it's sort of an iron triangle of policy making, diplomacy, with technical support, capacity building, technical assistance, and the business side, the investments to follow suit. And I fully agree with Matthias that I think we could be much better at developing the European scale model of this, because our colleagues from the delegation to the European Commission, they have neither a civil society nor a technical assistance team nor a business or investor community. They only have the diplomacy part, and in a way we are weaker as an EU in the projection of our Green Deal than we need to be if we organize properly and brought all the assets we have to the table.
Yes, you're Benedict. You're already grabbing the phone. That is a very the microphone. It is really an interesting point you just made, but that raises the question for me now. If that's the case, how to bolster the European case through strengthening some of the diplomacy for the European Union, but also, and that's why I'm saying, Benedict, maybe you have a view on that. What are the initiatives where, obviously there's a group of countries here that is leading already, and, but how can you turn this even better into a diplomatic driving force? I'm coming back to that. I'll give Benedict a chance, and then I've already seen Olaf raising a green pen, fittingly.
No, I just wanted to add, to do the diplomacy, you need to showcase leadership. That's really what this is all about. It's how do you showcase a leadership in the areas where you have your strengths. And from being an Icelandic diplomat, we showcase that. We can actually point to the data, and we can show the world, that we are on this path and we actually are quite advanced. So I think it's through that kind of a leadership. Now, I must admit that, then I do come from a very small country, so our impact as a donor, for example, is limited. That's why we need partnerships. That's why we really need partnerships, and that's where we sort of bring the impact that we want to show from the money that we put into this. That's through working with these people here. That's how we get the impact from that. But I also think that, when we talk about climate, we really need to realize that 70% of climate is actually energy. It's energy-related issues. And I think we really need to begin to actually show these countries that we want to work with the way to achieve this transition that we're asking them to take on. And so, we don't need to talk about it, but help them lay out the path. That's what helps them. That's why I think the Just Energy Transition Partnership is extremely important. And the effort that was given to Nigeria, and Nigeria now has an energy transition policy and legal framework that takes them to a net zero by 2060 with dollars and cents. And that's how we can do that. And that's where you showcase. Then the question about the money, which we all are always talking about, we can bring in the private sector. We can bring in the other stakeholders that we need, because public funding is not going to do this. We're not going to resolve the climate crisis with public funding. Rest assured. So it's through that kind of leadership.
Again, really, really important point. And I want to come back to the finance question in a minute, but Hans Olaf had a direct comment on this area of leadership.
Thank you. I think Benedict made the perfect segue to what I wanted to bring in there. And that's another area that we've been working quite closely together with Germany on over the years, and that's energy and geopolitics. Of course, we know that energy affects geopolitics, and geopolitics will affect energy and climate policies. And of course, we are now in the midst of this. And I think it's important, before we are getting into the detailed discussions on Europe, also look at this geopolitically, the squeeze that maybe Europe is in between the US and China on these issues. Of course, the US is in the sweet spot. They are energy secure, food secure. Europe has a great problem achieving energy security. So we need to really get our act together to achieve energy security in Europe, because we are the most energy insecure part of the world, if you look at it. While in China, of course, has the same problem. They are not energy secure either, and the same not food secure. So this is going to be a big battle, and we see it now with the Inflation Reduction Act also, which is in essence an act to counterbalance the influence of China. Now we're also creating, and then look to Africa that Benedict mentioned. Nigeria, Egypt, and Ethiopia will have each of them a population larger than Europe in a few decades. So there's a huge market opportunity. At the same time, a huge challenge that we have to address. And Africa is energy insecure and also food insecure. It's really strange that they should actually be in a position to be energy secure as well as food secure. So this and then we'll create new dependencies. That has been also the Secretary General of NATO warned us of being too dependent on China in terms of minerals, rare earth. They have 90% of the processing of these key minerals are in China, technology dominance, etc. So will we get access to all the minerals and the technologies we need? I think in the long term this will be solved, but in the short term, this is going to be a rocky transition where we have the new world overlaying the old world. So I think for those of you that are still young and promising, if you really want to start looking into an issue, look at energy and climate policies and geopolitics moving forward, because this is going to be really, really interesting and challenging.
Yeah, that is a very strong point, and indeed a question. I mean that just adds another layer that probably was always there to the complexity of fixing the climate, accelerating climate change problem. Thomas, a direct comment to that. Oh, and I see Matthias already also grabbing the the microphone, which is good.
No, I just wanted to add one comment here, which is when we talk about the technologies and the innovations, what we have experienced is, and that is of course on one hand we shouldn't be denying this. We are producing green technologies that are creating jobs and are creating opportunities both in our own countries and in the countries where we go, and we haven't really addressed that job dimension of the transition, but there is clearly a transition angst out there globally, that somehow by moving into the green transition we are in fact losing jobs, losing livelihoods, and that while for many years we've been focusing on poverty eradication in our global engagement, somehow this would then go the other way. And I think, at least in our experience, nothing could be further from the truth. It is true there are hundreds of thousands of coal miners in places like South Africa, India, Indonesia, who might stand to lose their jobs if we close down coal globally. On the other hand, they stand to gain hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs in new industries that will replace the fossil fuel-based industries. And when it comes to our own companies in this, I can only say that at least in Denmark, we see that the combination of us giving technical assistance and capacity building in green technologies and renewable energy, that is then backed up by, in a way, Denmark being a lab where people from all over the world can come and see the windmills working and the energy efficiency measures being implemented, actually gives credibility to the technology. And the fact that we have several gigawatt of offshore wind out there that we can take people to see, it also shows them we're not only preaching something that we want them to do, we're actually doing it ourselves, we're investing in it, and have been doing so for more than 30 years.
So that would emphasize once again the sort of the opportunities, the positives, the sort of collaborative and joint approaches of moving to a net zero world. Matthias, would you agree with that? We have not done that enough. I mean, I heard you saying that you want to do definitely more of that, but I would also like to build on something that Hans Olaf has sort of hinted at, that is that, there is one thing is to showcase the positives, to showcase opportunities, to collaborate, and then there is questions out there. Not everybody in this world wants to play your game, and it's probably not even the coal miners we're talking here about, but also whole states that rely on the old system very much so, and this is a big diplomatic challenge as well, because just offering a nice way out to certain parts of their societies wouldn't probably work. I mean, I'm already going into and even within democratic societies, you might have this conflict coming up. The Inflation Reduction Act has been mentioned. Sort of like shifting interests around. How does that fit together from a diplomatic point of view, and how do you mitigate these potentially colliding interests?
I think one way also at looking at the COP27 outcomes, I think we're all in agreement that we had wanted to see more when it comes to emission reductions. And the quite clear opposition to that from a number of, let's put it very bluntly, a number of oil-producing states who didn't want to go further. But it also, if you flip that around, might be a bit Swedish naive, but still, if you flip it around, you could also say that it is increasingly clear which direction we're heading in. And I think that was also sort of a reflection coming out from COP26, that, even if we were all very set on 1.5 coming out of COP26, but it was quite clear also that different countries have different timelines on how to achieve that. But the direction was clear. And I think we're still having that direction coming out from COP27, even if it's a bit more blurred, but still it's there. But and hence maybe the opposition you would have from particular countries who stand to lose in the short term from the transition is becoming stronger. And I would argue, and I think we would all agree, that it's in our interest as a global community to ensure that all countries have a just transition. In countries from us here, but also those who are the large fossil fuel producers of today. And how can we work together to ensure this just transition? What kind of opportunities and technologies and innovative solutions are there out there? And some of them are not there yet, but we need to work together to find those. And I think here as well, hopefully we, from the Nordic countries and Germany have solutions, or at least ideas we could offer as to how to make this transition. We've all gone through structural reforms of our economies, in years past. The challenge, of course, with the transition to net zero is that it needs to happen faster and across the whole of the economy at the same time. So how do you ensure that you have this just transition building on our history of social dialogue, ensuring that there is a place for everyone in the workplace, basically, and sort of engaging again with private sector, social partners to ensure that you're building that kind of society where everyone has a role in that new kind of economy. Just a final point here as well. I think it's worth. I've at least been. I'm encouraged by the engagement which I see in Swedish business actors, but I think with from all countries present here, in sort of the value chain approach that many companies are taking. Looking at Swedish companies who are, you have factories in one country, you have then the transportation to the client, and how you're securing net zero throughout that value chain. In energy within the factory, but also good working conditions within that particular factory, how then you ensure net zero transportation of the products that you're producing. So having that kind of approach also, of course, brings both knowledge, expertise to the decarbonization process in other countries when applying that kind of approach, which hopefully could be useful then for other countries as well.
That is an interesting that you mentioned the value chain approach. We're at Clean Energy Wire just running a project how journalists can assess whether companies actually can claim they're climate neutral, and that is so difficult when you talk to companies, how to actually do that, and then for journalists how to assess, or each element and step to that. But Kerstin, you've been about the just transition bit. I saw you. I guess that was the point where you were nodding particularly heavily. So before turning to Norbert, I would let's briefly check. What is it that you see particularly relevant here?
Yes, thank you. And I think the just transition, yes, that's where. But I think I also took it a bit forward. I think the parameters for our negotiations for our work on climate change at the moment, and Norbert referenced it in his opening words, and that is that we are, we not only are we, now working to combat climate change, but we are doing it in what is, can be characterized as a triple planetary crisis. So we will have to do it in a way so that we still protect and restore biodiversity, nature, and also in a way that we address pollution. So I think that's something that complicates matter further for negotiators, because we have to keep that in mind as we now take negotiations and processes forward, because they need to be in sync. And then on just transition, and maybe just focusing on the other part of Agenda 2030, which is really about leaving no one behind and the inclusivity of the work that we do. So again, making sure that it is for women and men, for boys and girls, that they are engaged and that they are also taken into account as we start looking at tools and measures to address climate change. And another issue that is now rising is of course persons with disability who are extremely impacted by climate change. How do we bring their voice into negotiations, and how do we make sure that the impact on them is also managed in such a way as everyone would expect. So thank you.
Yeah, very important point. And I just the other day had a conversation with a disability and disabled activist, and I was really humbled and ashamed not having thought about it properly, about this specific nexus, what's coming if you're not in a position to basically just run away. So yeah, that is a very important point. Talking about European values, actually, Norbert, you wanted to make a point, I guess, on what Matthias said, but I mean, it leads almost into the new paradigm of the Foreign Office, this sort of value-driven approach to all negotiations, but also to the question of climate action. Don't know whether you want to comment on that directly or just pick up where you wanted to get in.
No, I think I can just confirm that. So that has been in the remarks of my ministers again and again. And I already said it. I think you cannot distinct human rights from climate action. You would not be able to come to a really fair transition towards a climate compatible future if human rights and participation of civil society was not included in an undemocratic setting. You can see it in those areas where it's not like that. It's hard, and will not succeed. So therefore, quite convinced about it. I wanted to make another point on the just transition question. First of all, I think only last week, the IEA was coming out with a new report on renewable energies, where they came up with a headline: in 5 years, renewable energy investments will be by far the biggest investment share of all energy investments. So I think what that tells us is the train is on the track, so it will not go backwards. That will be the future everywhere, and that was a global assessment, not an assessment for Europe or for Germany or not for Denmark at all, of course. A global assessment, it's on that track. So now the question is really how to organize the transition. I think something which was overseen a little bit as an outcome of COP27, and some people were not really happy with it because they didn't know what to do about it, but I think we can take it positive, is that there's also a decision to establish a just transition dialogue. In the context. It was put forward by the presidency, we know that, and a little bit in a defensive position, or in a way like not to go too quickly, we need to look at that, but I think we can also take it positively, how we organize what's happening anyway. And if we look to European countries in particular, I can say for Germany, the point here is we do not have enough workers for implementing the transition. If I simply look at the building stock, to how to renovate all the buildings we have to renovate here, how to put up all the wind turbines, which we need to get towards 80% electricity production, how to put up all the photovoltaic, and that's only Germany, and it's even more the case in countries where we start more nearly from very low levels. So we need the expertise, we need training, and I think one of the points which I found striking in one of the discussions I had last week, I don't know who mentioned that, but it was perhaps we need also a big initiative on vocational training for renewable energies, for implementing that. We need the expertise. It's not only engineers, it's not only academics, it's a lot of work with hands and ordinary craftsmen, but they need to be skilled. And I think that could perhaps offer also the positive vision that the whole transition goes line in line with also creating more jobs and in the end also welfare.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. Two points. One from Benedict.
I
Sure.
just wanted to. No, this isn't working. You can hear me. Just two data points. Empirical studies show that for every million that you invest in renewable energy and or energy efficiency, you actually create close to 4 times more new jobs than if you invest in fossil fuels. So we shouldn't be afraid. We should actually point this out. There's no need to be shy that if you invest in the renewables or in EE, you actually are creating more jobs. On the transition, energy transition, the just transition, please do not forget that we have 600 million people who have no access to electricity. No access. IEA has stipulated and said if we do not close this energy poverty gap, which is 80% in sub-Saharan Africa, we will not achieve Paris. Simple as that. So let's not forget the 600 million who are out there. We need to close that gap. That's a part of this just transition, and that's, like Kristen said, this is the leave no one behind.
Just pass it on, Thomas.
Too quick. This microphone is not my.
It's a bit temperamental, indeed.
That microphone is not my friend. 2 quick points on this. 3 years ago, Denmark decided to issue no more licenses for oil and gas production in the North Sea. And we did so at a point when we were the largest oil and gas producer in the European Union after Brexit, after the UK had left the EU. But we did so because we do believe that the business case for offshore wind in the North Sea is much, much better than digging for more oil and gas. And in our part of the North Sea, we at least intend to build as much wind as we can at as much scale as we can, also in order to help our German neighbors with exporting green energy and hydrogen. You don't need to go all the way to the Arabic desert or Australia for hydrogen. We will make a lot in the North Sea. But as part of that political agreement, we also, in our largest port on the North Sea, made an agreement with the city, the unions, and the businesses to transfer the workers working in oil and gas into working in the wind industry and in carbon capture and storage. And it was sort of part of the package of the ending of new licenses that we would have a gradual transition of the workforce. And I think in our welfare societies, we can in some ways also show the way on how those types of deals can be done and give the example. The other part about the democratic accountability, that has also been a strong case for the outgoing Danish government to say, well, we were elected on a mandate, and in terms of not create more distrust amongst the electorate, we actually also need to show that we deliver on it. But it's interesting to see that in the run-up to Glasgow, 85% of the global economy actually did put up targets leading to net zero in 2050 or 2060. And one of the reasons why there are so big discrepancy between whether we are on a 1.5 or 1.8 or 2.1 or 2.8 track, it is due to the fact that most countries have actually put forward 2050 targets. And if you take them on the target, then we are more or less between 1.5 to 1.8. But most countries have not put forward 2030 targets that match their 2050 ambition. And the drive we're on now, next year in Dubai and in the future years, is simply to help all governments, all major emitters and everyone else to then match their short-term targets with their long-term goals. And to us, that is very much also a question of accountability, how you do that and how you hold governments accountable to the pledges they have made.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's always good to learn a little bit about, diplomacy on a panel, how you just, smooth a few ideas in. And, obviously, I want to come back to the road to Dubai in a minute. Is there a direct comment? Unless there is, I would at least check back with the audience if there are any, ideas, questions that you would, run by the panel. If not, there are so many, interesting points to follow through here. But at least I wanted to open. So here's a question. Can we take the microphone up, please? Thank you very much. In the middle. Yeah.
Hopefully it's one of those mics.
That works. Yeah,
Yeah, it works. Thank you so much for the really interesting discussion. My name's Janani Vivekananda from Adelphi. I just wanted to pick up on the just transition point and. Since all of your countries are also investing a lot in development in a lot of the countries that are facing some of these transition challenges, how does this conversation fit with the fact that many of the countries in Africa at COP were very explicit about the fact that they're going to unlock the LNG that they're sitting on, and this is a part of their perception of a just transition, because why is their industrialization why is that being locked out of their chances of industrializing the kind of 620 trillion cubic meters of LNG? So how is that sitting with the fact that they're also recipients of development assistance and part of your foreign policies? And if we're looking to have climate action that's compatible with development and stabilization and all these other parts, having coherent foreign policy, how does this fit? And another part of this is, not everyone's part of the European Green Deal, but perhaps to Nordic Garrison, how is the just transition part of the Green Deal? Because lots of African and other counterparts are saying, well, where do we fit in this? Where is it the bit in the Green Deal that we benefit from? Because it is global, right?
Do you want to take it first, and then I'm sure this is Matthias. I'll come back to the. Oh yeah, okay. So that question was right on spot. Maybe you start.
Yes, thank you to this question. First of all, I think there's a misperception. At least for the German government, I can say nobody is saying you should not find ways to sell your gas and oil to anybody. The question is more whether we should use the scarce public funds and public instruments we have available in order to support that. And here we think we have better alternatives. And the future, certainly even in Africa, is not with gas and oil. And we think it would be more appropriate or better to directly invest into renewable energies. But we're not dictating anybody not to do that. So to be very, very clear, if there is somebody investing in it, go ahead. I don't like it, but that's not the point. And secondly, I think it's not all African countries who are asking for that. Not all African countries do have access to oil and gas. There's many other countries who have a completely different view on that, and they are unfortunately not that vocal. Maybe they don't have the support to be that vocal, because I can clearly see that there are some interests behind the voices who are asking for LNG supply coming from Africa. We know there are a number of African countries also who would like to see the targeted, tailor-made approaches towards in helping them to invest directly in energy systems which are from the very beginning are based on renewable energies. That doesn't, unfortunately, get not the same kind of attention. Maybe we need to change that. And thirdly, I think the experiences for those countries who had been relying a lot on fossil fuels, also in Africa, is, I would say, at least mixed when it comes to the social implications. I don't want to finger point to any of the countries, but I think the cases are quite clear. That it's not clear that the incomes, the revenues from that exploitation is directly only serving the whole society at large. So therefore, I think there are better ways to address that. But again, we are not going to tell anybody not to use that. That is a misperception which is again and again repeated. That's why I'm repeating it the third time. That this is not what we are doing.
Yeah, Matthias, do you want to follow up on that as well?
Yeah, I think very much aligned with what Norbert said here. And 2 points maybe from our side. We are not either sort of financing any kind of fossils with our development finance. And we're not sort of putting that kind of conditionality clearly across either. Of course, that could be discussed, whether one should or not. And maybe just sort of an example there where going into sort of technical details here, but within the negotiations on the new financial goal within the UNFCCC, the sort of the goal which then will follow the 100 billion goal, which is to be decided in 2024. From the EU side, we have put forward that it could be useful for countries or rather the usefulness of applying tools such as carbon pricing and phasing out fossil fuel subsidies in the context of looking to how efficient can we be in sort of delivering the finance in the terms of the new goal. So I don't think, I even if it might be useful from a climate perspective to have those kind of elements in place in all countries. And again, when we speak to our business community, the single most sought after policy measure that they put forward is a global price on carbon. And if not a global price on carbon, at least that all countries should have price on carbon. So again, I think we're trying to find different ways within both the UNFCCC process and outside to advocate for more countries to be introducing those kind of measures. And I think the work that Finland has been doing in the Coalition of Finance Ministers to advocate for the introduction of a price on carbon on a global scale is really something which we need to be supporting, all of us. So the more that we can do that, I think the better. But then again, sort of having that kind of straight conditionality between our the development finance that we provide and what kind of policy measures that countries have in place is not there now. Might be potentially in the future, and I think definitely something which could be useful to discuss further.
Thomas, you want to follow up on that straight away? Now we're running out of microphones somehow, but that's fine. Just leave it.
Well,
passing on the baton.
I think where there might be a lot more work we need to do from a developed countryside, it is to match the end of public funding of fossils anywhere in the world with a scaled up support for building out the renewables, because the challenge in Africa is not so much the money, it is the cost of capital, and the cost for putting renewables up is simply too high, and we haven't fully explored the type of risk mitigation mechanisms and other mechanisms that would put the renewables at the same low costs as they are in our part of the world. I think that is more the challenge. Most African countries that talk about investing in fossils want to do so for exports, and I think the business case is simply not there for long-term investments in new fossils, because it takes about 10 years to get an oil well up or gas up and running. And when Europe succeeds with our energy transition, the timelines simply don't match. You will then have an up and running oil well in 10 years that will maybe produce something for 5 years, and then the cost that it takes to put it up, which is a 20 to 30 year time horizon, I mean, it will be a stranded asset and a lost investment. So we cannot justify doing that over our taxpayers' money. And the oil and gas companies can do it because they take it over their own balance sheet, which maybe is a good investment in the short term for them, but also in the long term, it's not a very good one. But the financial models for scaling up renewables in Africa, we still have not fully hit the mark on those. And I think that's where we need to really be investing our time and energy. And that's at least what we will do.
Thank you. And Hans Olaf also wanted to follow up on that particular question.
Yeah, since I'm representing the fossil, I'm the fossil person also on this panel. So 1.5, yeah, I still have 1.5. But of course, we also fully respect the governments to make their own energy policy decisions. That's our point of view. And we, from the Norwegian side, we don't support fossil fuel activities through our ODA budget. We've never done that because our budget line is even labeled as renewable energy. But I think Benedict brought up the important point there that 600 million people in Africa lack access to electricity, and that's our primary objective in our development cooperation, is to ensure that we solve the issue of energy poverty, and that should be through renewable energy. We will not even support hydrogen in Africa, because that is, for us, not the way Africa should go for the time being, because that's oriented towards export. But we need to ensure that the 600 million gets access to electricity and clean cooking as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Was that the sort of answer you were looking for? I get a thumbs up. You get a thumbs up. Very good. One more question, then we would go to a final round with our panelists here.
Hello, my name is Moritz Schleicher. I'm from Generation Climate Europe. You were mentioning earlier the energy you have seen among the actors participating at the COP, among them also private businesses. And you were also mentioning the fact that we need private sectors to finance the transition towards renewable energies as well. At the same time, we are now seeing a record-breaking profit-making by oil companies. And I'm wondering, did you see during the COP negotiations any willingness by those companies to invest the profits into renewable energies? And if not, how can we foster their willingness to do so?
That is how can you foster their willingness to do so, if not? There's another question. Should I take that on? Yeah, that is actually a very good idea. I haven't seen that. Apologies.
Thank you for all being here. So Norbert Gorisen, you were...
Briefly say who you are.
I'm Kirsten Pals. I'm here as citizens of Europe.
And it's fine just to know that who we are talking to.
Yes. So Norbert Gorisen, you were the one who were addressing the rights of future generations. And I do see that in Berlin and the rest of Europe, it's a generation who probably are the ones who's going to be the most successful in making this transformation and willing. And therefore, I think it's really important that you give more voice to this generation. I'm really happy to hear that this is one of your goals. And because I see this living in Berlin with children and young people, that they are the one who comes home from Fridays for Future, changes how we eat, changes how we consume, changes how you think about mobility, and I would hope that these voices were much stronger in Europe and also could be more united across borders.
Yeah. That is a very strong point, and I already see someone itching towards the microphone. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to reflect on the question regarding the getting the companies in the right position. I would encourage you to look at in the run-up for the high-level dialogue on energy that took place at the last day of the UN General Assembly last year, 21. One of the outcomes that we were seeking were actually commitments by the private sector, as well as, of course, states, towards the SDG 7 goal. And if you go on that platform, you can see actually that Shell, as an example, has pledged to bring 100 million people in sub-Saharan Africa clean energy before 2030. So there are pledges there, and we shouldn't, those are the positives. So I encourage you to go and have a look at it. You'll see a lot of companies that have actually pledged towards the transition.
Any further comment on that? I mean, whether that's then the fast enough part, we shall see.
Also, thank you for that question. First of all, I think the private sector is as diverse as societies are. So, of course, you have companies who are making huge profits out of the current crisis at the moment, and they may be even not interested to think about what useful they could do with these profits, whereas there are also other companies who think differently. So a little bit different to assess them all with the same assessment scheme. For me, I would like to make 2 points which are important. One I mentioned in my opening remarks. The Secretary General of the United Nations was very worried about the many net zero commitments coming up, in particular in the General Assembly, and beforehand, so many companies committed we will be net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. And very little transparency and clarity and action how that would be achieved. And that's why he committed to set up an expert panel, a high-level expert group led by previous Canadian Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, to look at that and come out with clear criteria on how that should be improved, this situation. And they made up very clear comments on credibility, on transparency, on accountability of all those pledges. And as I said, the executive secretary of the Climate Convention was tasked to set up an instrument in order to check that it's becoming more clearly that we can really see who is credible with that and who not. I think that's very important, and it's very important to recognize it. It's hardly taken up by the public because it happens already in the first week of the COP, and thereafter and so many other things happened that this was a little bit forgotten. So that's why I'm happy to repeat it here. And the second point is the decision about setting up a loss and damage fund gives the transitional committees a specific task to explore and identify sources for filling the fund. And that includes innovative financing. And there is already a debate to what extent one can also try to find ways in order to use some of those profits. Of course, in the end, you need to have legislation in place in order to achieve that, which is for sure challenging. My colleagues perhaps can comment on that in particular. So we're coming from...
And they do want to comment on that. That, really highlights a very spot-on question if you get like 4 raised hands towards the end of a panel. Hans Olaf, please.
Can I just address the issue of windfall profits? Of course, today it's oil and gas. What's going to give windfall profits tomorrow? So from a market perspective, I think this is a challenging and difficult issue because, like I said, today it's oil and gas. In Norway, we tax 79% of the profits from oil and gas is actually 79%. So you can come to Norway and we can learn you how to tax oil and gas, and they are paying up because they're making a lot of money by all means, and we as the government are making a lot of money also. So of course you're bringing up a key issue, that how we are going to respond to this, and we will respond in one way or another, but that's being still discussed. So we'll see how this is going to play out. But I think from a principle and market point of view, it's difficult to start fiddling with the market because this might change relatively quickly when it comes to windfall profits also. So I think the best thing Europe can do is actually try to crush demand as quickly as possible, and you're doing that. And when you crush demand, then you also solve this problem. But for the time being, some will make some money, but we need, as a government, we need to tax, and then we need to make sure that those are being harmed, that we put in place social safety nets to take care of it.
Yeah, please. I mean, you know, I know Thomas wants to add something as well, but Matthias, please go ahead.
Just two brief points on this. I mean, I think Hans Olav also highlighted sort of the opportunities that countries have in introducing various types of carbon pricing measures. And again, and I think Sweden and Finland are the forerunners. And Finland was actually first in carbon pricing globally, followed by Sweden in 1991. And I think we have the highest carbon price in the world as it is. But also, I think worth highlighting maybe here, maybe that's sort of a bit of a sidetrack, but still, the transition that we're seeing within the financial sector, and at least when we talk to Swedish banks, for example, you know, they are in a process of basically saying to their clients that at some point in time, we will no longer be providing you with credit unless you prove that your business is in line with the Paris targets. I mean, of course, it's, you know, for Swedish banks, maybe not so many of them are engaged in fossil fuel companies for various reasons, but I think that kind of movement which we're seeing within the financial sector is worthwhile highlighting. And of course, this goes only not to banks, but also to pension funds and insurers and so forth, how they are changing their investments and being more in line with Paris targets. And I think that the more that we can achieve that this is a global movement, that will also then sort of help us with the phase out of fossil fuels on a global scale.
Thomas, you want to add to that?
Well, just to add to that question of a levy on fossil fuels, Norbert mentioned the loss and damage fund and how it will be financed. There are a few other ideas that are sort of being discussed around. One is to have somehow a tax on aviation, on flights, that could pay into that, and the other one is whether to have a global levy on shipping, which I think the shipping, there are some ship owners who are now investing into green vessels that will sail only on green fuels, but in order to create a level playing field, they could actually help. It would help to have some kind of levy that would penalize those who are very dirty in their fuels and then favor those who are clean. And there's an idea that has been, I think, proposed by the small islands that having such a levy could then help fund the loss and damage fund. So in a way, you would create a positive incentive also for the funding of that new fund. The other piece, and very much welcome the energy by young people in pushing this. I think it was Hans Olav who mentioned that there will be this push on fossil fuel phase out for the next COP in Dubai. Personally, I don't think we will get there with that kind of idea without a global movement amongst young people and activists who will in a way hold governments around the world accountable to that kind of push. Fossil fuel phase out as a decision by a COP will be a momentous decision when at some point that is taken. It took us 26 years to get coal mentioned in a COP decision, and to have oil and gas there. We had a last minute push in Dubai, in Sharm the last night, where groups representing more than 80 countries actually spoke out in favor of it, but then in the end it wasn't taken into the final text. But I think for young people in Berlin and elsewhere, that could be something to think about. Thank you.
That is almost a perfect last word, bringing in all the elements from the audience and what has been said there. I want to have one last question to each and one of you with a very short answer. What is the one you mentioned, Thomas? I mean, I'll take you out of that now because you already mentioned Dubai and what you want to see en route to the next COP. To all of you, what is the one priority on a diplomatic level, that you want to focus on, that should be focused on to make Dubai a success and raise ambition? Kerstin, let's start with you. Or you can pick someone to start if you still want to think.
No, thank you. I think we will need to be prepared for the global stocktake, which will be a measure of our progress, and we will also need to be prepared to come with a response to what might be a bit of a bleak picture. So again, going back to mitigation, going back to what it is that we do very well in our part of the world, spreading the word, providing an example, and helping countries to come on board.
Good. Benedict, if you want to grab, I hope it works. What is the one priority, diplomatic priority en route to Dubai?
I think it's really to raise ambition and do that through sort of data and proofs. So the work plan, the mitigation work plan is important, but we need to raise ambition. That's just as simple as that.
Good. Simple message here, raise ambition. Matthias.
If I might put it in a slightly longer perspective and looking ahead to 2030, where we need to cut emissions in half by 2030. We need to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And the kind of institutions and legislation that we need to cut emissions is very much sort of also what we need to achieve the SDGs. So how can we use the urgency of climate action also as a lever for these wider development gains? It's not something which we might achieve by COP28, but could we start this year sort of linking the climate and development sort of and economic agendas? I think we're sort of on a good track to achieve both climate and SDGs targets by 2030.
Norbert, before Hans-Olaf, I would like you to wrap it up in the end. But Norbert, what is the one priority en route to Dubai?
Yeah, no surprise here. I think COP27 did a historic decision on setting up serious funding arrangements, including a new fund for loss and damage. That should allow us, together with many progressive, also developing countries, talking about the least developed countries and the islands and Latin American countries, to work towards a big splash on mitigation in Dubai. And I think having a language phasing out or phasing down on fossil fuels, as Thomas mentioned, would also be my biggest wish.
Hans-Olaf, bringing the bracket after the introduction from the ambassador.
It was good that you gave me this role to sort of try to wrap it up on behalf of my ambassador, who I think has left already. But I think this discussion has clearly demonstrated that COP27, it was a mixed bag in terms of outcome. I think it's also quite clear from what my colleagues have said that the direction of travel is quite clear. We know where we want or where we have to go. The question, of course, is the speed. That I think it's full agreement here that we are not doing enough. I think for me, something that has not really been mentioned here is that the decision on loss and damage, at least maybe, will help to create some trust and much needed trust in negotiations. And I think that is really important. So it's a small glimmer of hope, maybe more than a small glimmer of hope, that we can use this trust into a more constructive engagement, and that applies across the board because, let's face it, it's negotiations and we all bring in our views and positions, and sometimes it's hardline positions also. This issue is actually too important to have hardline positions. We should have actually had the same position to try to move this forward. I think what has been mentioned, it's going to be a tough one on the issue of oil and gas. I think it needs to be clear and put it squarely on the table. There are 40-50 countries that are oil and gas producers, and they are pretty strong. They are not going to bend over quickly. So I think it's going to take a lot of work to really work with them to also offer an alternative. There are 4 groups that you need to cater in any transition. It's the miners, farmers, soldiers, and fishermen. If you don't look after them, then they can derail any transition that we are going for. even though economically they are not that important, but politically they carry a lot of weight. For me, what's happening in private sector is encouraging, so I would call upon all of you to follow the money, because that's where we see also on the windfall profits, we see whether they are investing and sending the money in the right direction. So far, at least when it comes to COVID-19 stimulus packages, we didn't do it. It didn't go in the right direction. It was a missed opportunity. So I'm hoping now that we can send the money in the right direction. Finally, I would like to see a stronger leadership from voters, not from politicians, because that will, if we, the voters, give the politicians the right mandate, they will do it. But for the time being, I don't think we have all the voters on board, and we need to get them on board so we get the politicians to take the necessary actions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And yes, I think that's definitely worth an applause. Thank you, all the six of you, for a great panel, and for you, I mean, to wrap it up and to follow through with the questions and discussion points. Thanks to our hosts here in the Nordic embassies, there is the opportunity to discuss further over Glühwein, a few buns, and or a coffee. From my end, I can only pick up on the young people. I mean, maybe having heard and seen this, maybe one way for young people to get engaged for the track towards a climate neutral future is joining the foreign service in their respective countries, because one thing seems clear, that is now a real priority of foreign policy, and you know, the six of you have made that really clear with a lot of passion and interesting points. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience, and now let's go and have a Glühwein.